Natural hazards occur in the world. When these hazards are met with vulnerabilities, they may induce high natural risks. These risks are increased by factors such as overpopulation, poor urbanization, and proximity to diverse issues. From that moment on, disasters result in human loss as well as significant material, economic, or environmental damage. According to the 2020 World Disasters Report published by the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, since 2010, 83% of all disasters have been caused by extreme weather and climate events such as floods, storms, and heat waves affecting 1.7 billion people worldwide and leading to more than 410,000 human loss. How do we respond to natural disasters? With the classic disaster alert and response system, we do not necessarily know when, how, and what activities to trigger when a natural risk is announced, and generally, money and means are lacking. Thus, we most often react once the disaster has already occurred, resulting in late response, higher financial costs, and significantly greater human loss. Ultimately, disaster response cannot be improvised. Anticipated response mechanisms are necessary to be effective, efficient, and sustainable. And given the difficulties of a classic response to natural disasters, reducing risks is the best approach. How to reduce the risk of disasters? Disaster risk reduction involves all of the prevention, preparedness, and mitigation actions established before the onset of a disaster. This comprehensive approach not only promotes the inclusion of risk reduction measures at all stages of the disaster management continuum, but also in all regular humanitarian development aid activities. Since 1998, the French Red Cross has been carrying out disaster risk reduction programs as part of its international action. These programs are based on the 7 fundamental principles of the movement and guided by international frameworks and standards, as well as the regulatory frameworks of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies and those of the French Red Cross. They are, at all levels, implemented in collaboration with a multitude of risk management actors. The forecast-based financing mechanism is a perfect example illustrating an approach of disaster risk reduction. What is the forecast-based financing approach? Developed by the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, the forecast-based financing approach allows for early anticipation and response actions based on disaster and meteorological forecasts rather than on the impacts of said disaster. The idea is to take advantage of the time window between the warning of an upcoming potential disaster and its actual occurrence in order to carry out early actions that will allow the population to anticipate the impending event whilst protecting their lives and livelihoods. Early actions are based on weather forecast combined with risk analysis. The goal of forecast-based financing is thus to anticipate disasters and reduce their impacts, consequently promoting community resilience. Building a forecast-based action is a process that involves several steps. First, developing the risk analysis determining the nature of the risk that an area is facing as a consequence of a natural hazard. This step also makes it possible to measure the probability and frequency of the risk as well as the vulnerability and exposure degree of the population based on socio-economic indicators. Next comes defining the impact levels to identify triggers and thresholds to be able to initiate early actions. Then, identifying forecast systems, both scientific, meteorological, hydrological, geophysical, and empirical. Community early warning systems information or traditional knowledge enables information to be obtained before a potential disaster occurs. These forecasting systems are the key to the success of an early response. The next step is to choose the most appropriate and feasible early actions to anticipate the negative impacts of the extreme event to come. Once the early actions have been selected, we move on to the drafting and validation of a duly budgeted protocol, which will be validated by a body of IFRC experts whose role is to verify its relevance and feasibility. Once the protocol has been validated, the different indicators must be monitored to trigger actions as soon as the threshold is reached. This is the forecast monitoring stage. And finally, implementing rapid actions to reduce disaster risks.
Since 2019, the French Red Cross and the Niger Red Cross have been experimenting with forecast-based actions in Niger in different projects aiming to strengthen community resilience facing periods of food and nutritional insecurity. Just like its countries in the Sahel region, Niger is strongly impacted by many risks, especially droughts, which have a direct impact on the population's livelihood and their food and nutritional security. In Niger, there is only one rainy season, generally from June to September, and therefore only one cereal and forage harvest from September-October. In the event of a good rainy season, the harvests allow the agro-pastoral and pastoral populations to cover their needs for both cereals and forage until the following rainy season. On the other hand, in the event of a bad rainy season, cereal and forage harvests are below the necessary quantities, leading to an exhaustion of food reserves for the population as well as for the livestock, and this as early as February-March of the following year instead of June-July normally. In addition to the food insecurity faced by the most vulnerable households, their livelihoods are also seriously affected due to the need to buy cereals on the market when prices are highest, or due to the loss or poor sale of their livestock, which is the main source of income for livestock farmers. Thus, forecast-based actions aim to 1. Limit the impact of a poor rainy season and therefore poor harvests. 2. To anticipate the potential food crisis for farming families. And 3. Anticipate the pastoral crisis and its consequences for the livelihoods of pastoralist families that will result as soon as the following month of February. What forecasting systems, triggers, thresholds, indicators, and early actions do we use? In the case of Zander, we will have 3 triggered thresholds and 3 sets of early actions to put in place. Firstly, to anticipate the impact of a poor rainy season and potential poor cereal and forage harvest, we will use the seasonal weather forecast issued from April by the European Centre for Weather Forecasts, ECMWF. The selected threshold trigger is a rainfall forecast as lower than normal with a probability of 40% or more. If this threshold is reached, different early actions will be implemented from May. For the pastoral population, this will mean, on the one hand, raising awareness among farming families for better management of available forage and the optimization of livestock destocking, and on the other hand, carrying out the tellurian vaccination of livestock combined with vitamins and deworming. For the agro-pastoral population, short-cycle seeds adapted to the drought will be distributed, allowing farmers to have a minimum yield of harvest despite the poor rainy season that is coming. Secondly, in order to anticipate the food crisis of the agro-pastoral population the following year, we will use the assessment of the food insecurity population rate provided by the harmonized framework in November, with a trigger threshold being phase 3 out of 5 of IPC, which is a crisis phase. If this threshold is reached from November, the following early activities will be implemented. The pre-positioning of cereals in cereal banks, allowing farming families to have access to these resources from November until the next harvest at a subsidized price and in sufficient quantity to meet their food needs. A conditional cash transfer to farming families in order to enable them to obtain supplies from the cereal banks and build up reserves before prices rise or the cereals are no longer available. And thirdly, in order to anticipate the pastoral crisis and its consequences on the livelihoods of livestock farmers, we will use the assessment of the uncovered forage needs rate provided in November by the Ministry of Livestock. The triggered threshold will then be the uncovered forage needs above 40%. If this threshold is reached from November, the following early activities will be implemented. The pre-positioning of livestock feed in livestock feed banks as well as cereals in cereal banks, allowing pastoralist families to have access to these resources from November until the next harvest at a subsidized price and in sufficient quantity to meet their food needs and those of their animals. A conditional cash transfer to the most vulnerable pastoralist families in order to enable them to buy from the livestock feed and cereal banks and build up reserves before prices rise or supplies are no longer available. These measures will therefore allow pastoral and agro-pastoral families to better apprehend from November the upcoming crisis. Ultimately, forecast-based actions reduce the impact of the upcoming drought and limit the expected costs of an emergency response.